Are you a serious dinosaur collector that wants to make better buying decisions? If so, this is the show for you. Welcome to episode 8 of the Dinosaur Review Show.
Today we're going to be talking about Giganotosaurus. Giganotosaurus is a large Carcharodontosaur dinosaur from South America.
Before we get started, George, what is the fossil record we're dealing with today?
It's pretty good. Giganotosaurus is fairly complete. Do have its arms, majority of its skull, and its vertebral skeleton. And we know, thanks to that skeleton, that it is one of the largest dinosaurs, even rivaling T-Rex. Mostly what they're missing are leg bones or limb bones, but most of the axial skeleton, as it's called, everything from the backbone to the tailbone to the neck bone, and some skull parts, the arms are intact.
Where would you like to get started, George? We have 8 to look at today.
All right, let's take a look here. This is our Giganotosaurus from Mojo. Right off the bat, it is a very spiky dinosaur. Look at these neural spines that are running through the back. The first thing that everyone thinks about when they think Giganotosaurus is the skull, because this skull is almost 5 feet long. That's bigger than T-Rex's skull. So let's take a look at the teeth. The teeth are all well painted. It has those smaller crests than T-Rexes have. If we go to the arms, their arms are also pretty sizable, although you are starting to see that trend of them getting smaller on predators. Feet are fairly large, which I imagine gives it a nice standing base, very firm and sturdy. There's a curvature along the tail, which, I don't see much in figures. Typically, they're like straight out. You've got your pelvic muscles right here in the pelvic floor, but there is no cloaca, something that we've been touching a lot upon here with our dinosaur toy reviews. I will say, I do like that they didn't make the claws black. We have no evidence whether they were black or maybe clear or a different color. If you look at birds and reptiles today, not all their claws are black, so that's a nice little touch.
What do you think about the proportions on that model, George? Because the bottom feet look a little bit large and oversized, clownish to me, and the arms look a little bit longer than I was expecting.
The arms, they are a little bit longer, but when it comes to dinosaurs like Carcharodontosaurs, their arms were meant to grab. The feet, I agree with you though. These are monster feet. They shouldn't be as big as the head. That's for sure. So I would say the proportions of the legs are a little bit off. The arms they're closer than the feet are, but they are also a little bit out of proportion.
And no evidence for the spikes that we see along the side and the back?
No evidence. This is just a cosmetic or aesthetic choice. I think it looks cool, especially the osteoderms. Osteoderms are bony plates that you see underneath the skin. So that is a nice little touch. Also no evidence for that on Giganotosaurus.
And fixed jaw, not movable.
Yes, unfortunately, this is a fixed jaw and does not close.
What would you like to look at next, George?
Let's look at the Schleich model.
Actually, there are 2 Schleich models. There's an adult and a juvenile, so let's take a look at both
All
of
right.
them.
Yes, this is the Schleich Giganotosaurus. And look at those teeth. They're alternating sizes, which, already, it's not the most accurate when it comes to Carcharodontosaur teeth. They're pretty consistent all the way through, but we see some longer back there, which isn't typical. Notice the skull patches here. These are very shrink wrapped. Shrink wrapping is when the skin is really tight on the bones, and unless this poor dinosaur was emaciated, it's it's not going to look like that. And you see those spikes there as well.
And what are those cavities and spots on the side of the head representing?
I'm glad you asked. So this is a nostril, so the nose hole, and this is the anteorbital fenestra. That's a space in the front of the orbit where the eye is that makes the skull stronger and lighter. Behind the orbit, which is where the eye is, we have the ear hole, or as close as an ear hole gets to a dinosaur. As far as we know, they didn't have ears like we do, that are made out of cartilage, so they had a hole there, which they would use to hear, but it wasn't this big. It would probably have been a smaller opening, much like the nostril, a little bit more conservative, but I don't see a hole that they added there. The jaw does open and close. It's not as well painted as a previous model. These teeth are kind of globby, but I do like that it opens and closes. If we move to the arms, this is not how dinosaurs held their arms. I do like the elbow fold, which is kind of like a wing, but the wrists face inwards, not outwards. This is called pronation on the limbs. This guy is not doing that. Well, he's kind of doing it there, but not here. It's kind of confusing. I do like the stripe coloration on it. looks very, very ancient. If we look at the foot proportions, oh, look at that. It's got a little dainty foot in the back. It's mid-stride. I do like the proportions of this one a bit better, but it is still a very big foot. We have another curve of the tail, but this one seems a bit too meaty for what I think they had tails. I mean, from the top and the bottom, it doesn't look that odd, but from the side, that is one thick muscular tail. If we look at the bottom, no cloaca, but you do have that pelvic protrusion where all the tail muscles attached to the leg muscles and the hip muscles. I would say, it was a good attempt, but this is not my favorite so far.
George, let's move on to the juvenile figure.
Oh, I like this one a lot better. The proportions are a lot nicer on this one, especially for the feet. They're not as thick. The head sculpt is a lot better, less shrink wrapped, more accurate. The jaws and the teeth are very well painted. Every tooth is individually painted. That is a really neat detail. And again, you have all of the structures, the nostril, or as we call it, the nares, anteorbital fenestra, the orbit, and then the ear canal. Now, I will say that just because the skull isn't as shrink wrapped, it doesn't mean the rest of the dinosaur isn't. You can see ribs here. Poor little guy needs a sandwich. The bottom part, its pelvic muscles are smaller, but the tail isn't as thick as on the mama or papa one. So I guess that's why I like it. It's a more proportionate interpretation. So I would even say if you want to pass this off as an adult, you could. But they do pair well since they have the same coloring and patterning. And the arms, the arms are accurate. See, they're facing inwards. Their palms should be to their chest. And that's exactly what it's doing. All right, I kind of like this one. Even that little curve of the tongue. This is a good one.
So let's move on to the Safari LTD model.
Look at this. Right off the bat, look at that beautiful skull. It's not shrink wrapped. Every tooth is individually painted, and even the tongue is very glossy, giving it a wet appearance. The arms are pronated, so that means that they are accurate, facing inwards, and the feet, beautiful proportions, but if you look, they're very slender toes, which is probably why it needs the base. These are the smallest feet we've seen so far. The tail is beautifully proportionate, and the musculature on the pelvis is just about right, but still no cloaca. And I just gotta say, I love the patterning. It kind of looks like it lives in a desert environment, kind of like desert camo. I really like that one. Look at that golden eye. Love that little touch there. This is a pretty neat model. I really like this one.
Let's move on to the Papo figure, George.
Right off the bat, the striking pose that it's doing. It's kind of like, ta-da, I'm here. Still no cloaca. Oh, wait. No, that's just a manufacturing thing.
Yep.
The pelvic muscles look strong in this one, though. And on full display, we have this movable jaw, which I gotta say, this is probably the best one. Look at those teeth. Those teeth are beautiful. They're not just white. They have kind of like a yellowish tint to them. The arms, each claw is a different size, which I did not see that attention to detail on the other dinosaurs. And they're pronated, so that means the arms are facing inwards towards the chest, which, look at those pecs. Do you think this Giganotosaurus worked out?
More than me.
The arm proportions are a little bit larger than the other ones as well, though. And the legs kind of look thin compared to the other ones we've seen so far. But the feet, oh my goodness, look at those. Those look amazing. They've got those beautiful scales on the feet. The claws are curved in just the right way. And you can see the calf and the leg muscles that go all the way up to the top. But still a little focus on just how small the thighs are. They do have some osteoderms running from the back all the way to the tail. And the tail is kind of small. It's really, really tiny compared to the other ones. I would say this is not very accurate to the size that Giganotosaurus has had tails. Other than that, it's kind of an odd pose. Dinosaurs typically don't really stand straight up. They're more of a horizontal position.
And what about that neck position? Every time I look at it, it just seems awkward or odd to me.
I get that feeling too. What it reminds me of is like a cat getting scared. So like all the hair stands on the back of its neck and it's just in that awkward pose. So maybe this is one very scared Giganotosaurus. Maybe it saw another Giganotosaurus and was like, I don't want to get near that one. But I would say this pose is not my favorite, which is a shame because I really liked everything else about it.
And next up, we have a figure from EoFauna.
I've not heard much about EoFauna before this. I do know that they make this Giganotosaurus because I was in the market for one not too long ago. I gotta say, I'm loving the articulation of the jaws that we're seeing so far today. I mean, these guys are famous for giant skulls and jaws, so to have that ability is really important to me. The teeth aren't as noticeable in this guy. They're really tiny. Just look at that. They're like itty bitty tiny teeth. And they do have kind of like that difference in size, which I don't know if that's entirely true.
Would you say those teeth are too small overall?
It depends, because this could just be Giganotosaurus with lips, which is a big debate in paleontology right now, whether dinosaurs had lips or not. So it could be that the lips are occluding the full length of the teeth, but even not looking at the full length, I would say they're still too small just on their thickness in comparison to the skull. You've got your nose hole, your anteorbital fenestra, your orbit, they're all there, but they're not quite as shrink wrapped. You have a thinner neck here than other models that I've seen so far. The arms are pronated, facing inwards, but the claws look like tiny little nubs. Looks like Barney's hands. I love this transition. You see the chest, it doesn't look very, very thin. It's kind of barrel chested here. And it makes a smooth transition to the leg, which I do like this extension of the leg muscle. Down to the calf. The feet are the correct proportion. See, this is how big they're supposed to be. Not too tiny and not too big. It's in a walking position. We flip it over. Ah, I think this might be our first cloaca right there.
Huzzah, a cloaca!
If you look right there, that is a clear cloaca, which makes me happy because they would have been very visible on these dinosaurs. That's how they laid eggs. That's how they went to the bathroom, you know? This one has a very nicely proportioned tail, and I do like the coloration that kind of bleeds into the leg, and it turns into a spottiness here in the chest and the back too. This is pretty neat. I will say this one is the most proportionate that I've seen so far.
Let's move on to the first of two PNSO models, George.
Oh my goodness. See, I may be a little biased here because this is one that I have at home. I will start with the head as I've started with the other models. The teeth, these are way more visible than they were in the previous model. But I will say it kind of has a little bit of an underbite. You see that? There is quite a bit of shrink wrapping on the skull. If you look at there, anteorbital fenestra, it's very sunken in. It does have kind of an ear hole right there that the other ones did not have, so I'm very appreciative of that. If you look at the hands, they're a little bit more, I would say, delicate than the other ones. They're very small, but they are facing the right position. See, this one's facing the chest, and so is that one. This one's just in a more relaxed position. This poor guy has not eaten in days. The legs, oh my goodness. This dinosaur has thighs for days. If you look, it also has calves for days. And the feet are proportionate, just like our friend before. These feet are very well sculpted. It has the scales that I really like seeing on dinosaur feet. And the claws, they're not as sharp as they were in the other ones, but if you're walking on these all day, I doubt they'd be that sharp. Let's look underneath, and there she is, the cloaca, right there. A little less noticeable than the other ones, but it is a clear indentation. And speaking of indentation, you see this slight indentation underneath the tail. That is a good attention to detail. The tail muscles attaching to the tail bone. So it wouldn't have been just a smooth tube. It would have shown an attachment to that leg muscle, which dinosaurs are the only creatures to have that muscle attachment. Crocodiles and birds don't really have that because crocodiles don't walk on two legs, and birds do walk on two legs, but they don't have a tail to support. So this muscle here that you see supports that, and this is the first one I've seen that has that. It does have those spikes on the back, which again we talked about. They were an aesthetic choice, but I kind of like it on this guy, especially the osteoderms going down from the neck to the tail.
You're just saying that because you own this one, George.
Probably. I mean, I love the color too. It looks like a morning in the forest.
I do find it odd that PNSO would have taken such liberty with the osteoderms and the spikes on the back, because normally they pride themselves on their accuracy.
They do. So that is why we're looking at the updated version of the PNSO one next.
Yes, George, PNSO did release an updated version of Lucas.
The skull is a lot more robust than the previous Lucas model, and oh boy, you can see every detail. The nostril, anteorbital fenestra, the orbit, and the ear hole. Now, look at these teeth. This is what I was talking about earlier in the other videos, that they need to have that proportionate, gradual increase and decrease of the size of the teeth. And the gloss is always a nice touch inside the mouth, makes it look very, very alive. The arms are pronated, so they're facing inwards. This guy had very tiny arms compared to the other Giganotosaur models, which is closer in line with what we know about them now. They were a little bit out of proportion earlier. And the feet, oh, speaking of proportion, those are great. You've got your foot pads on there as well. And look at those scales. Every individual scale is sculpted into this figure. Oh, and there we go. It even shows that same muscle that we saw in the previous model. And would you know, there's the cloaca. It's a little harder to see, but that skin fold is meant to be hiding it. Towards the back, you kind of see the gradual decrease in size of the tail. That's pretty nice. It's not too thick. If you look at the top, it's not shrink wrapped. It's a very healthy Giganotosaurus. In fact, I'd say this is the healthiest one we've seen so far. I'd say I really like this one.
All right, George, mugshot time. Let's take a look at the heads. As we look at them side by side, anything jumping out at you?
I gotta say, the thing that's jumping out at me is the size of that Schleich Giganotosaurus' skull. That is a huge, huge skull. In fact, I think it's the biggest one, second only to the Mojo. Yeah, I was just trying to see. These are massive skulls.
But you did say that they had an oversized head.
So-
are they too big relative to the models, or are they correct?
I probably should have specified. When I say big, I just mean like thick skulls. Giganotosaurus had kind of thinner, more gracile skulls, at least in comparison to Tyrannosaurus. We're so used to the boxy heads of T-Rex that we want to incorporate that in other meat-eating dinosaurs, but these guys were streamlined, they were fast, they were agile, they were strong predators, but walking around with a bulky head, that's not beneficial. So what I should have specified was that they had long.
So these are too boxy and wide.
They are too boxy and wide. The Schleich and the Mojo are too boxy.
Any other comments on the heads, or the rest of them all look acceptable?
I would say the rest of them look acceptable with the exception of the old PNSO one. That one does have that thinness, that longness, but it has too many ridges on the top, which is something that was probably added for conjecture, aesthetics. Make it look pretty.
All right, since you mentioned ridges, let's look at the sides and the textures. Anything else jumping out at you?
I really like the paint schemes on the EoFauna and the Schleich. They're a little bit different than everything else. And the Safari as well, like that one goes a completely different direction. It's like super light compared to the other ones. All the other ones are a little bit more muted, with the exception of the Schleich ones. They have a pretty unique pattern to them.
And the scales and the textures, are any of them not correct?
Yeah, I would have to say the least likely scale patterns or textures would be the Schleich ones, because they gave them elephant skin. They kind of have these striations, these stripes all along them that are not very scaly per se. We all know dinosaurs had scales.
The original PNSO.
It has a lot of osteoderms and scales, as well as the Mojo one that we have no evidence for. Those kinds of bumpy textures on the skin are more akin to Abelisaurids, which include Carnotaurus, and everybody knows Carnotaurus. And that one was spiky and bumpy, but these guys, we have no proof of that.
Let's take a look at the lower feet, George. Anything jumping out at you?
Yeah, so there are three that I want to mention. The Mojo one, feet are too big. They're bigger than its head, practically. The Schleich ones, similar problem, although not as big, but still, these feet are too big for the Giganotosauruses. And the Safari one, I feel it's a little too thin. Now, there might be more of the foot buried underneath the stand, but I don't think even if we did take the stand off, would it be able to stand on itself.
Let's take a look at the mouth and teeth. Anything jumping out at you?
Yeah, so I did mention this earlier. Some of them did have the wrong proportions and patterns and sizes of the teeth. The most accurate ones that I've seen have been the PNSO ones and the updated, or the baby Giganotosaurus from Schleich. Those have the more accurate tooth sizes and patterns.
Let's take a look at the upper arms, the tiny arms.
The ones in the Papo are too big. The ones on the EoFauna, I don't like how nubby they are. The PNSO old ones, the arms are also a little bit too small. The Mojo one are also a little bit too big. Although Giganotosaurus' arms were a bit bigger than T-Rex, they were not that big.
Let's take a look at the bellies, George. Would counter shading come into play here?
I would think so. They were predators, so counter shading helps with camouflage a lot, especially if you're hunting large animals with really long necks that can have a big look over the distance and see you coming from miles away. I would say The Schleich ones don't really show counter shading. They're kind of the same color all the way through with only the stripes on the back. The Papo one does have a slight change in color, but it's not the best. The Safari one, that one also doesn't have much of counter shading. So I do like the EoFauna and the PNSO paint schemes though. Those counter shadings are really good. And you know what? Mojo as well.
Decision time, George. Which one are you going to buy for your collection?
I would buy the PNSO Giganotosaurus, the newer model.
You already have the older model.
I do.
Is it a big enough difference that you would feel the need to upgrade to the newer model?
Yes. It is a lot more updated to what we know now about Giganotosaurus. Plus, I'm a sucker for accuracy, so I want to be up to date and accurate to what I have in my collection. Otherwise, I feel like as a paleontologist, I'm leading people wrong if I have the wrong model.
Which one is the next most accurate?
I would have to pick the EoFauna.
Really? You had issues with the upper arms and the teeth size, and even still, that's the second most accurate?
Yes, I can see why the arms aren't as sharp because it is a safety issue. Plus, the teeth, it's easily fixable if you close the jaw, so I don't have to think about it too much if I close its jaw.
Next in line?
Next in line from that would probably be the PNSO old one. It's still accurate in proportions and size, but what isn't accurate is really just the scales and just how hungry it looks. Well, maybe it's a hungry predator. It's a different take, but that's why I would put it on that tier list.
Which one's next, George?
Safari LTD. This guy, I really like the paint scheme, even if it probably wasn't very helpful in hunting. It did have stripes, but it's the lighter color it's not really practical. But the jaw proportions are really good. The body proportions are too, and the arms. The only thing I don't like is the base and the feet.
All right, next.
Oh, it just gets harder from here. I would then pick the juvenile or baby Giganotosaurus from Schleich. I do like its proportions and how they kind of updated and fixed what was not entirely accurate with the parent figure. So that would be my next choice.
And maybe we will cut it off there and we'll just leave the last three as ones that are not George's favorite and are not as accurate as the other models.
You would be right. It's like you can read my mind.
All right, that concludes this episode. Thank you for watching and we'll see you on the next one.